Hello and welcome to Walking the Earth podcast, where we explore the travel lifestyle. You can find us online at WTEpodcast.com. We're also on Facebook, Twitter at WTE Podcast, or you can subscribe on iTunes, SoundCloud, or Stitcher. I'm Mike Margulies. I'm calling in today from Baltimore, Maryland, and our guest today is Supriya Williamson in Ewing, New Jersey. Supriya, how are you doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm great. And so, Supriya, you just returned back to the States. You've been serving for the past 3 years in Botswana, working for the Peace Corps.
That's correct.
Yes, I'd love to hear, I guess in your own words, maybe folks might be interested to hear more about that experience. You were working, with HIV/AIDS. But yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear more about that in your own words.
Sure. So basically, Peace Corps Botswana is focused, like you said, on HIV/AIDS. So we have 4 different sectors. Some people work in schools, which is what I did, and we're called life skills volunteers. And basically, what the goal was to teach kids life skills, basic skills that they need, like decision-making skills, how to set goals, how to reach your goals, self-awareness, general confidence, things like that, with the idea that once they have those life skills, they will be less likely to engage in risky behavior and contract HIV. So it was a kind of a prevention thing, and also just to, help kids lead more successful lives. So I was working for my first 2 years in a boarding school, a primary boarding school. So that was with ages 6 all the way up to about like 12 or 13. So we had about 500 kids at our school.
Cool.
Yeah.
So the idea is kind of like you're teaching just general sort of responsibility ideas and skills, and the hope is that would also translate into people living more responsible sexual lives as well, or drugs, whatever it is that makes people at risk for HIV and AIDS in that area.
Yeah, exactly. So trying to just give kids those, a lot of our kids didn't have parents. I mean, since HIV is such a big problem, you have a lot of kids that are growing up as orphans. So a lot of the kids are orphans, or like at my school,
so it compounds on itself.
Right,
kind of.
Exactly. So they're not gaining those basic life skills that a lot of us take for granted, and even just like being aware of themselves, being aware of what they're interested in and what they want to do and what makes them happy and what makes them sad, all those kind of basic things that we just assume, we tend to take for granted. That kids really they have to be taught, and no one's teaching them if they don't have parents. So that's what our goal was, to try to get these life skills taught, and not just for us to teach them, but to also train teachers to carry it on, because we're only in any given place for 2 years, and then Peace Corps the goal of Peace Corps is to be sustainable. So
so you have to train kind of your own successors, basically.
Right. Yeah, you have to. Yeah, the whole model of Peace Corps is sustainability. So whenever you're doing any project, you're supposed to have a counterpart and be teaching them along the way, and not just doing it on your own, which already makes a pretty hard job even harder, especially when you don't necessarily have buy-in right away from the people that you're working with. So
they just didn't understand the value of the skills you're teaching?
Yeah, I mean, the problem was there was this curriculum that the government wanted these teachers to integrate into their daily curriculum, or their daily lessons. But the major problem with it was they didn't think about the fact that, A, it wasn't tested, so the teachers knew that there wasn't going to be really any accountability for it.
Right.
And B, they were already struggled to get their regular curriculum in. So trying to fit something else, they just, they weren't interested in squeezing something else into their curriculum.
Right.
And I think, yeah, you're right. It probably does come from maybe not understanding the value. And even if they get it in theory, in practice, it was really hard to implement. So.
Right. If they're not getting tested on it, they don't have any some direct feedback or anything that comes back to them. So their performance, or I don't know, but I guess they get a raise or whatever they're rated on. if it's not related to that, I could see how they maybe don't have the incentive
Right.
to care as much.
Yeah, I mean, and the other problem is teachers in Botswana are also just in general not that motivated. I mean, it's in Botswana, it's not, people don't go into teaching like they do here, like for the love of it. It seems in general like we saw, and it wasn't just at my school, a lot of my friends that worked in schools, teacher, it's a pretty good job. It's a government job. It's, pretty stable. You don't get fired. So people go into it so that they have like a steady income, and they weren't really doing it because they cared that much.
Right.
So that makes it even harder because they were like already sort of apathetic. They just wanted to get the curriculum done, and then trying to tell them to do more work was just like not, did not go over that well.
So like, how do you deal with that though? How do you get the buy-in from these guys that are, ultimately going to determine in the future how successful it is?
Yeah, I mean, that's the $1 million question. I mean, I think for me, what was the big thing was just building up the trust in the first place. And I mean, that's why Peace Corps.
So good relationships.
Yeah, that's why Peace Corps is 2 years long. I mean, and sometimes it feels like it's not even long enough because you need like even that first year to really get your foot in the door of really having people like trust you and believe that your projects have value and that you're really there to do something good and that you're sticking around, because maybe you'll hear you say, oh, I'm here for 2 years, but they might think, we don't know if she's really going to stay and we don't really know if this is like really going to be worth it. So for me, it was like really building up the relationships with the teachers, doing a lot of little things, like what they say in Peace Corps is kind of your first year, you're lighting a lot of fires, so to speak, and then whichever pot boils first, those are the ones you focus on. So you kind of like put out a lot of ideas. So is always just like talking to people, talking about what's wrong, talking about what they need, what they're interested in, and sort of coming up with the projects together. So so they're part of the creative process, and they have more of a stake in it. Yeah, exactly. So if it's something that a teacher comes up with themselves, then obviously, like you said, they're part of it, and then they're going to be a lot more interested in helping you than if you're just coming in and saying, this is what we should do, So you kind of like, I kind of was just constantly throwing out ideas like, well, why don't we try this? Why don't we try that? And then if somebody would latch on to something, then that was the one we would go with,
Yeah. No, that's cool. I think that that relates to, I guess, a lot of things in life, right? Mm-hmm. Where it ends up coming down to relationships a lot of the time at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And getting just instead of just telling somebody, I guess, okay, this is how you do things. Like a lot of projects, you tend to get done better when you say, hey, we're working on this thing together.
Yeah.
And everyone feels like, they're part of it and they came up with it,
Exactly. And I mean, I think in Peace Corps especially, most volunteers would agree, I think, or at least the ones I worked with, was at the end of the day when they ask you, your closing service, and they ask you at your exit interview, like, what are you the most proud of? And a lot of volunteers, and myself included, would say, I'm proud of the relationships I built. Because really, with those kids especially, and even with the adults, like the way that you're making a difference in their life is showing them that you care, and just building that relationship maybe can do a lot more than even any of your projects, any of that concrete stuff. And so that is actually a really, really important part of Peace Corps, well, and in life, like you said. But
yeah, I mean, it's true. Like, it's funny because it comes up actually a lot on the show. We've had a diverse array of guests, and like more than anything else, that's the thing that people bring up is, oh yeah, it was about whatever various things people were doing. It's the relationships ends up being like the big thing, and for me too, that was the case as well. Right. So it's I
think it's a pretty universal thing, and I mean, and especially when it comes to service, I think too, it's you can be a lot more successful if you are working with people and being supported by each other and listening to each other.
Definitely, and ultimately you're trying to help people, and so like the best way you can help someone is through that that solid foundation.
Yeah, exactly, and hearing them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
Yeah.
So I mean, like, what what got you involved in the first place in Peace Corps? Like, what made you say, this is what I want to go to Africa and I want to help kids with HIV and AIDS?
Yeah, well, so I went to George Washington University for undergrad and majored in international.
I've been hanging out with some GW guys this weekend, actually.
Oh.
It turns out like a fraternity, like Founders Day event, actually.
Cool.
I went to Maryland's, but we do like a joint event because we have the same fraternity.
Cool. Well, yeah, so I went to GW, and I loved it there, and I majored in international affairs, and so, I was obviously interested in traveling and global issues and things like that. But what really got me involved, ended up leading me to Peace Corps, was the Alternative Breaks program, which is where students do community service trips over their spring and winter breaks during college. Right. And so I went on my first trip to New Orleans to build houses for Habitat for Humanity after Katrina. And that really sort of was a paradigm shift kind of for me, and really shifted my focus towards service, and that was what I really became passionate about. So over my 4 years at GW, I was really involved in the program. I led a bunch of trips, and I was ended up being the chairperson for my senior year, and sort of running the whole program. Or helping to run the whole program. So when it came time to graduate, it just seemed like a really next natural step, I guess, to go on to Peace Corps, because I had gotten this taste of doing these short service trips, but I really wanted to push myself further and see, get out of my comfort zone and really, immerse myself entirely in that whole process and in another culture and in another place, and really see what it was like to not just go for a week and then come back, just to move my whole life to being that, being in service. So, yeah, and at that time, the application process has changed since I applied, but at that time you didn't choose where you went, or you didn't know what you were going to be focused in. You just applied, and they assigned you where they thought you'd be most useful. So I got assigned to Botswana, yeah.
So you wanted to do some kind of, service work somewhere in the world, and stay there for a long time, and you said, sign me up, put me somewhere I can help.
Exactly, yeah. So they've just changed it now this year, so now you can choose your sector and your place, which I had mixed feelings about, because I don't know if I necessarily would have chosen Botswana, but it ended up being great. I met my husband while I was there, so
okay.
Yeah,
cool.
So obviously it worked out well for me, and I loved my service, so.
Yeah, but you stayed an extra year, right?
Right.
So you must have, really connected with the work you were doing and the people there.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So, I guess the next natural question I would ask you is sort of, now you've done 3 years working, doing a lot of great service work abroad. You're back home in the U.S., so I guess you're looking at going back to school, you were saying to me, I think, before the call. What's kind of next for you?
Yeah, so right now I've applied to doctoral programs for clinical psychology, actually. So
cool.
I'm sort of changing paths, but still focusing, like we were saying, on relationships and talking to people and listening to people. And I think my biggest takeaway from Peace Corps was, like we were just talking about, was for me, that making those connections with people, that's where I felt most useful, and that's where I felt like I had made the most difference. And especially in my last year, I worked, my third year, I moved villages. So my first 2 years, I was in a little tiny village. It was about 500 people total in the village, and then 500 kids that boarded at the school. So, that was the whole real Peace Corps experience, like you hear about, with no running water and a little hut and out in the middle of nowhere. So I had that my first 2 years, and then my third year I moved to this bigger village that was more like a tourist town. Still small, but we had grocery stores and things like that. And I had running water in my house and stuff. So that, for my third year, I worked at an NGO that provided support for orphans and vulnerable children in that town. So that was, for me, I was even more building those close relationships, because it was a smaller community, and it was kids we were seeing outside of a school setting, so they open up to you more, and it was more of a mentorship role. So that was just really rewarding in building those relationships. So I decided I wanted to sort of make that into a career, and come back here and go back to school for psychology. So
that's
yeah,
that's really cool. Yeah, so it sounds like you. I mean, you had an interest to begin with. Like you wanted to help people. You wanted to go out abroad.
Yeah.
Do all that awesome stuff, and in doing that, you found. Kind of an overlapping area there, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Where to pivot to your next sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I don't think I ever maybe would have, I don't know if I ever would have landed on this as like the career for me if I hadn't done Peace Corps. So, yeah, I mean, it's definitely changed my life for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. I can definitely relate to that, how, the traveling for a long time can really kind of help you to figure out some of what you're interested in.
Yeah, and I mean, and it wasn't just from the work, that was a huge part of it. But it was also, I mean, you really do a lot of soul searching and self-discovery and stuff, especially when you're living in this tiny village by yourself and you're the only American, and you're living alone in this little house. And, honestly, a lot of Peace Corps, you have a lot of downtime. And we do work hard, but you also have a lot of time where, your meeting got canceled last minute or whatever. Your job is like not really a 9 to 5,
Right.
So you have a lot of time where you're just like sitting in the middle of nowhere. You don't really have internet ever, and internet or cell phone reception's down, and you don't have anything to do but kind of like sit and think. And it was actually really valuable time, I think, to figure out who I was and what I wanted. And it's something that a lot that people don't really do that often, is just sit.
No, it's true.
Sit and do
very
nothing.
true.
Yeah.
In stillness, there's a lot you can learn. Actually, there's a really good TED Talk. Do you know Pico Iyer is?
No.
Well, he's got. I'll send you a link, and for folks who want to see this as well, I'll put it on the show notes. He has a really good TED Talk called Finding Home, I think it's called. But he basically talks about the value of travel, but then also circles it back to the value of stillness. And it's something, I definitely agree with. I mean, for me, the experience, I did one of these Vipassana meditation courses at one point in my travels. So this is like 10 days of not
silence,
talking. Silence and meditation. And that was, my, I guess, analogous experience to what you had.
Right.
I definitely can relate to that, how it's in that that stillness and that silence where you really find things out about yourself.
Yeah, definitely.
So I can imagine if you're spending, a couple of years out in Botswana and you don't, you definitely will figure out a lot of things,
Yeah.
So.
And you also just learn how to, before I went to Peace Corps, sitting and doing nothing, I'd always have sort of an anxious feeling of I'm supposed to be doing something. I have to be productive. And, that's a very American thing, I think.
You have to be busy.
Constantly, you have to be busy, otherwise you feel guilty, But that time in Peace Corps, you just learn how to just really do nothing, and it's a pretty cool experience. And I mean, you learn a lot of patience too. I mean, my village was 5 kilometers, so that's 3 miles from a main road. So it was 5 kilometers of dirt road. And then when I just to go grocery shopping, for example, I would have to either walk those 5 kilometers and then hitchhike 30 more kilometers to the grocery store, or sit and wait for a ride if I had a lot of stuff with me that I couldn't carry for an hour walk or whatever. So I spent a lot of time just sitting on a rock under a tree, waiting for someone to come along and drive me home or drive me out or whatever. So you just get so much patience that you never thought, you tap into some other kind of, I don't know, way of being, or you just could sit patiently and just sit there. And I can already see myself slipping back into this now with a smartphone and this and that. You're constantly I have to be entertained,
Yeah, I've slipped a little bit back into it myself. Yeah,
it's hard not to.
Yeah, it really is hard. It was much easier, when traveling, to sort of just be content. I'm just kind of living, and doing my thing, and it's absolutely, for me, since being home for a couple of months, it's it's starting to kind of kick in again. I'm thinking to myself, oh, what am I doing with myself?
Right.
I need to be doing something.
Exactly. Yeah. I know it's hard to balance that, once all those things that I was like, oh, I'm going to make sure I remember that when I get back. And it's like, I've only been back in the States for 2 weeks. I mean, I've been traveling for like a month after Peace Corps, but back in the States for 2 weeks, and it's already like, exactly getting back into that. So it's good to remind ourselves, like it's okay to not be constantly looking at a screen or constantly entertained or constantly doing something.
I should be better at this by now.
It's always hard. I mean, you come back into this culture and everyone else is doing it, so
right.
it's hard.
We're very influenced by the culture around us.
Right.
So
yeah.
It is very easy to slip in.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Well, let's see. I guess another thing I would like to ask you is, so now I already know one thing you want to do, which is go and just keep studying. But what's something else that you want to do in your life, anytime in your life before it's all over?
Ooh, that's a big question. I don't know. I mean, I definitely want to keep traveling. I mean, there's lots of places I still haven't been, a lot of things I still want to do, a lot of places I still want to see. I mean, and I'd like to somehow with my career, like combine traveling and international work with psychology. So using that, using psychology to help underserved communities internationally. So I'd like to become, maybe work for an organization that helps refugees or immigrants, or sort of like combining those interests into one thing. I still want to have a family. I still want to have kids.
That's good.
Yeah. I think it'll be nice to be settled for a little while.
I can relate to that.
I think I'm looking forward to settling down for a bit, and being in one place and being with family, and like I said, raising a family. And yeah, I mean, who knows? The future is sort of wide open right now.
Yeah.
So
I know that feeling too.
It's I don't, who knows? It's so hard to really plan. I've learned too, because you never know what life's gonna hand you.
Absolutely.
We can plan all we want, but who knows what's gonna happen? So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we try it. We always try to like plan everything, right?
Right.
Like everything, all intricately planned. But then, something always happens, and our plans always just
change.
Boom.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
even like with me and my extension, like I was never planning on extending for a third year. When I left, I remember my sister was like, there's 2 things you can't do. You can't meet somebody while you're over there and move to Africa, and you can't extend your service for another year. And of course, I did both of those things.
Right.
So, and I was like, no way. I'm not going to meet anybody. What are you talking about? Like, no way. And I'm not going to extend. I mean, 2 years
Surprise.
is long enough. Yeah. And then, of course, I ended up being there for over 3 years. And
well, that's not a bad thing, though. I think you were doing the thing that felt right for you at the time, so that's always good. And and I mean, I definitely relate to what you're saying, though. It's like after being gone for a long time, I'm definitely in this similar phase where like, okay, that's why I'm back in Baltimore now.
Right.
It's sort of like, let's just stay still and be home for a while.
Right. Yeah.
I think that's always I think that's a good thing. But again, it's like like you're saying. I don't necessarily know what my future brings either, so it's like, staying open to the possibilities, I would say, is... I guess it's something you learn when you're out abroad for a while, is...
definitely.
How to be open to the possibilities.
Yeah, because you don't... I mean, I think in Peace Corps and traveling in general, and it's what they always say in Peace Corps, like during our Peace Corps training, is to never have any expectations, so...
Right.
You're always leaving yourself open to anything, and if you're not, like, so latched onto your plan, I think you can be a lot happier, because then it's not like, oh, my plans went wrong. It's like, oh, look what's happening now, so it's if you're not having those expectations, then you're not attached to them, and then you won't be sad if things change. You'll be happy.
Yeah, what's hard for me now, actually, being back in the States, is I'm still trying to live that lifestyle. And this relates to what we were talking about before, how it's like, the culture around you kind of influences you and makes you maybe lose some of those lessons, so to speak. But I'm trying to be kind of not have things super planned or anything, but I'm finding it's very difficult because my peers always have things planned. Right. Yeah, I'll meet someone and say, hey, well, let's hang out tomorrow. Right. And they're like, oh, I'm busy the rest of the week. How about next week? I'm like, what? We have to make plans a week ahead.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I guess I don't have anything on my calendar next Monday, so that's cool with me, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. I know. And especially like, for me now, I graduated in 2011 from college, and so now exactly like all my peers have been established in careers for the past 4 years, or have started careers for the past 4 years, and now I'm like sort of just getting started. So there is sort of that like element of like, oh, like, did I do it wrong? But I don't think so.
I don't think so. No, there's no wrong way to eat a Reese's. There's no wrong way to live a life.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but so it sounds like though you still got the travel bug in you. I mean, maybe sometimes stability, but you see yourself kind of being abroad again in the future.
Yeah, I mean, especially even my family is really international. Like, my dad's from India. He lives in India.
Okay.
And my husband.
What part of India?
He lives in Mumbai.
Okay.
Yeah, so we actually were just...
That was my first stop on my trip.
Oh, cool.
Actually,
we were actually just there on our way back. We went there first,
cool.
Yeah. So that side of the family is all there, and my husband's South African, so his family's in Joburg and Cape Town. And then my brother is living in Sweden.
All right, so you've got lots of family reasons to take you around.
Yeah, and another brother in Brazil.
Oh, wow.
So we're all over the place. So, I mean, it's definitely, I do not see myself going a long time without leaving the country. Even if it's just to visit other people, but so it's very global family. So it's a big part of who I am and who we are as collectively as a family too.
Yeah, that's really cool though.
Yeah, so I definitely want to I'll definitely be keeping that as part of my life. And with all these Peace Corps friends, I know all my friends will be all over the place too. So
yeah. Do you see yourself like living for an extended period in another country again? I
don't know. It's hard to say. Like,
right, you don't know the future.
Yeah,
of course.
Exactly. It's hard to say. I mean, I know for the next 5 years I'll be here because I'm going to be doing my PhD. So I have 4 years of school and then another year of internship that has to all be in the U.S.
Right.
So I'm sure obviously there'll be short trips in between there. But then we'll see after 5 years that we might be ready to move somewhere else. So yeah, I'm really not sure. I could see, I don't know. I don't see myself maybe ever living in Botswana again, but maybe South Africa or maybe Europe. So, I really don't know, but I could see it.
See what the future brings.
I'm not close to it. I'm definitely open to it.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah. Really cool. I love this story. I guess what if somebody is listening wants to get involved with, say, Peace Corps? What's the best place for them to go? Like peacecorps.com or .org or something?
peacecorps.gov.
Okay.
And there's an application, and like I said, the application's different now than it was when I applied, but they say that it's easier and faster, and you can choose where you go, but you don't have to choose. I would encourage people to sort of let it be decided for you, because I mean that's kind of exciting.
There's something fun about that.
Yeah, that's kind of the exciting part of it, is like you don't know where you're going to go, and the whole point of Peace Corps is being open to service and willing to go where you're needed. And also, like I was saying about not having expectations, if you're choosing somewhere or based on what the job description says, I mean,
right. You already have an expectation.
Yeah, and I am pretty much guaranteed that job description won't be what you're actually doing.
Right.
Because, like I said, Peace Corps is like very much you're figuring out as you go, and every community is different, and every job within that country is going to be different. So if it says, like, on my job description about my life skills job, I mean, yeah, I did some of the stuff at said, but you do a lot other different things too. Like I said, I built a library, and that wasn't in my job description.
Well, that wasn't in the yeah.
So, I mean, it's like if you're tied to that job and thinking, I'm going to gain these specific technical skills, you won't, but you're going to gain a lot of valuable skills no matter what. So I don't know. I guess my advice would just be not tied to anything that is how I was explaining it on the website, and be open to just going where you're needed, and it'll be great no matter what, I think.
Yeah, I think that's pretty solid advice, actually. I will second that advice.
Yeah.
I haven't done Peace Corps, but I like the attitude behind it.
Yeah.
So I'll second that.
Yeah. Cool.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, Supriya,
Yeah.
thank you so much for coming on the show. This is
Sure.
awesome chat.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. And, I think folks will, I'm sure there are folks listening that have thought about doing some kind of service work abroad, and
Yeah.
definitely find this information really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I can't encourage it more. I mean, I think it was, it just such a valuable experience. And it doesn't matter what stage of life you're at. I mean, we had a lot of people in our group that were, I've been working for 20 years and then decided to do Peace Corps. So, I mean, even if it's like, but I've already been out of college for a while, it's fine. I mean, you can do it at any point. You always have something to offer, and it's really, if you're thinking about it, you should do it.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Cool.
Well, I'll link up on the show notes with this episode. I'll link up to Peace Corps and I guess this TED Talk I mentioned. That's all, folks. You can find that at WTEpodcast.com. And again, you can also subscribe to us on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter at WTE Podcast. So, please subscribe, share, all this good stuff. Supriya, thanks again for coming on.
Sure, thanks again for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you, folks, for listening to this episode of Walking the Earth Podcast. We will catch you next time.
Next time on Walking the Earth Podcast, Mike has a conversation with Shana Crumley, who is currently serving in Colombia for the Peace Corps. There she's working on multiple projects, but her main project is working with public school students to teach them English. Hear about her experiences in Colombia, her frustrations, her joys, her perspectives of working in the Peace Corps next time on Walking the Earth Podcast at WTEpodcast.com.